They didn't storm the palace at first. They came with paper, folded, stamped, sealed, the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need swords to feel dangerous. Inside the fort of Jhansi, a queen reads it in silence. Outside, the city feels different, not panicked, not loud, just tense, like something invisible has shifted under its foundations. And somewhere between that ink on paper and the stone walls of the fort, a kingdom begins to tilt. Not suddenly, but unmistakably. Let's go back. Jhansi is still a court. Stone corridors, painted halls, rituals that define order. Rani Lakshmibai enters this world through marriage, becoming queen consort, and after the death of her husband, she actively governs Jhansi as regent. But succession is never just emotional, it is political. And in Jhansi, that politics is becoming unstable. Across India, the British East India Company is expanding influence through policies that redefine sovereignty. One of those policies is the Doctrine of Lapse. In practice, it meant something very direct. The British East India Company refused to recognize her adopted son and used this refusal as grounds to annex Jhansi. Jhansi attempts to secure continuity through adoption, a practice with established precedent in Indian dynastic tradition. But British authorities did not accept this succession. What appears as administrative policy on paper becomes something far more consequential in reality. A question of whether Jhansi has the right to remain itself. At first, it is paperwork. Then it becomes negotiation. Then pressure. Officials arrive. Correspondence increases. Decisions are questioned. And slowly, authority inside Jhansi begins to feel conditional, as if it must constantly justify itself to external approval. Inside the court, unity becomes fragile. Some advisors reportedly favor cooperation, believing compromise may preserve stability. Others see the process as gradual erosion of sovereignty. The queen is no longer only managing a kingdom. She is managing uncertainty inside it. And she did not initially start as a rebel leader, but became one through the escalation of conflict. Beyond the fort walls, something larger begins to form. Unrest. In 1857, rebellion spreads across northern India, not as one coordinated movement, but as separate uprisings, fractures, and local conflicts. Jhansi is drawn into it gradually, through proximity, pressure, and collapsing authority structures. At this stage, accounts begin to diverge in detail. Some British sources accused forces associated with Jhansi of involvement in killings of Europeans in 1857. However, her personal role remains debated among historians, and interpretations vary significantly depending on source perspective. What is more consistently agreed upon is the shift in atmosphere. The palace no longer feels ceremonial. It begins to feel operational. Jhansi becomes a position that must be held, not just governed. The adoption dispute, once legal, becomes existential because it is no longer only about inheritance. It is about legitimacy, about whether authority is recognized by tradition or denied by policy. Outside, British correspondence continues. Orders, directives, administrative declarations. Paper becomes pressure, and pressure becomes instability. Inside Jhansi Fort, stone corridors, royal textiles, structured silence. Outside, uncertainty, shifting loyalties, and the growing shadow of conflict. This is a reconstructed visual interpretation based on historical descriptions of court life and siege-era conditions. Within this space, Rani Lakshmibai is described in multiple accounts as taking an active leadership role in the defense of Jhansi, not as symbolic presence alone, but as operational authority under crisis conditions. Traditional attire, often described in Maratha-influenced styles, exists alongside practical readiness, movement, urgency, adaptation, not a sudden transformation, but pressure-driven evolution. As rebellion spreads further in 1857, Jhansi's position becomes increasingly unstable. British responses tighten. Local alliances fragment. Neutrality becomes harder to maintain. Jhansi moves from political tension into open conflict conditions. The fort, once a seat of rule, becomes a defensive stronghold, not because it was designed for war, but because circumstances leave fewer alternatives. During the siege and collapse of Jhansi's defenses, she escapes the fort. Most accounts describe her fleeing on horseback, often with her child. This moment becomes one of the most widely repeated elements of her story, not only as an escape, but as a transition point from ruler under siege to mobile resistance leader. Jhansi, as a fixed seat of power, is no longer available to her. In the midst of this instability, Rani Lakshmibai becomes a visible figure of resistance. She takes an active leadership role in the defense and aftermath of Jhansi's fall. What emerges is not ceremonial authority, but battlefield leadership shaped by collapse. A ruler operating in conditions where governance and survival merge. Jhansi falls under opposing control after intense conflict, marking the end of her formal rule there. What follows is not disappearance. It is movement. After Jhansi, she continues to be associated with the wider 1857 uprising. This phase is less consistently documented in precise operational detail. Different accounts emphasize different movements and alliances. What remains consistent is her mobility and continued engagement in resistance activity. Leadership becomes fluid, not anchored to territory, but to motion and necessity. By 1858, British forces are systematically suppressing the uprising across central India. In this final phase, she is engaged in battle near Gwalior, according to widely repeated accounts. She dies in battle near Gwalior in 1858, not in court, not in exile, but in conflict. Her death becomes a defining symbolic moment of the uprising, not because it ends the rebellion alone, but because it represents what she had come to embody: a refusal to let legitimacy dissolve quietly under external denial. Rani Lakshmibai's story is not only about war. It is about pressure and what leadership becomes when legitimacy is stripped away. When authority is no longer protected by ceremony and must instead be defended through action. Leadership, in her case, is not inherited stability. It is adaptation under collapse. Authority must be defended, not assumed. And crisis forces role expansion from ruler to military leader. Whether viewed as queen, commander, or symbol, the central tension remains. When systems collapse, what does it mean to still stand for legitimacy that others are prepared to deny?
If this story moved you, there are more like it on this channel. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.